Welcome back. I'm Peter St. Onge. This is a weekly roundup of my daily videos on the economy and freedom, where I cut through the BS and lay out what the gaslighting clowns pulled out of their hats this week and what is coming next. The big, beautiful bill is in trouble. Last week, the handful of fiscally conservative Republicans in Congress revolted against the orgy of spending Mike Johnson's rhinos are trying to jam down their voters' throats in next year's budget. The specific sticking point was green handouts and Medicaid, which currently pays able-bodied men who refuse to work more than it pays low-income pregnant women. But the larger issue is next year's budget is being run by a big spending rump of the party in dramatic defiance of actual Republican voters. The so-called moderates represent less than 1 in 5 Republican voters, so they're not moderates, they're extremists on spending, yet they are running the show. They're raising spending when voters want it cut, including gobbling up all the DOGE savings and then some. They won't touch Medicaid or welfare, even the fraud. They won't defund left-wing NGOs. They won't even touch green subsidies, which are the poster child of left-wing corruption. And forget tax cuts, they're barely managing to keep the rates we've got, with a couple scraps for tips, overtime, and a tiny bump in the deduction for seniors. As the Wall Street Journal put it, they're, quote, basically demanding the GOP ratify the Joe Biden spending path. The background here is Congress can pass budgets with something called reconciliation, which means you only need 51 votes to pass. That means Republicans can do it all on their own. They do not need Democrats. And yet, instead, cuts are being blocked by these spending extremists who may as well be Democrats. The reason they're doing it, of course, is partly to buy marginal voters, so Medicaid to buy black men, so-called SALT deductions to buy rich suburban New Yorkers, and partly, of course, to pay the donors who buy them vacation homes, whether those donors are waving crypto checks or solar subsidies they got from taxpayers. So as next, I've mentioned in previous videos how every political party is a permanent civil war between the voters who hired them and the special interests who bribed them. We're seeing that in living color, and so far most Republicans in Congress are choosing these special interests. The 800-pound gorilla is Donald Trump, the political howitzer, as the Journal puts it. So far, he's been quiet on the battle between conservatives and rhinos, being respectful of a Congress that is famously prickly when pressured, but if they can't pass, he'll have to step in. The question is, what will Trump do? On the one hand, for a politician, Donald Trump almost uniquely fights for what his voters want. On the other hand, the reality is Trump needs Republican control of Congress in the midterms, or his entire agenda grinds to a halt, everything but the executive orders. So given a choice between Trump being able to pass some of what he wants in a rhino Congress and being able to pass nothing in a Democrat Congress, the ugly realities of the Washington party come into play. The solution's simple in words, if not in deed. Voters and new media have to keep pressure on Congress to the point they are afraid to go rhino. We have to be Congress's backbone because the liars and cheats sure as heck won't do it on their own. The federal government just got downgraded, with credit rating giant Moody's nixing the federal government's last perfect credit score. Now you might ask how the heck the federal government has a perfect credit score with $2 trillion deficits, $36 trillion in debt, and a Congress that spent 50 years acting like a pack of teenagers with stolen credit cards. Moody's move was expected. Fellow ratings agency S&P downgraded the U.S. back in 2011 when Barack Obama was running our first trillion-dollar deficits. Credit agency Fitch downgraded in 2023 when Joe Biden upped the ante to permanent $2 trillion deficits. Through it all, Moody's was silent until now. Now, mainstream media was positively giddy since this was Moody's first downgrade since 1917, and it was all on Trump's watch. My base colleague Richard Stern shared a chart showing how Moody's did not downgrade in the 2008 crisis. They didn't downgrade in the world wars, which was $10 trillion in modern terms, all borrowed. Not even in the Great Depression did Moody's downgrade. They didn't downgrade when FDR defaulted on the dollar, taking it from gold to paper, nor when Nixon finished off the gold standard in 1971. But now that Trump is in office, now Moody's downgrades, citing not spending but tax cuts. To put it in perspective, our Republican Congress is currently voting to increase spending on the order of $160 billion a year. This is deeply disappointing to the voters who they allegedly serve, who voted for big cuts. But $160 billion is almost 6 times less than in Biden's last budget, where he asked for $1.2 trillion and got $800 billion from Congress, plus Ukraine. That level of spending growth swamps Trump's tax cuts, and yet Moody's had zero problem with it, nor with the preceding 108 years of fiscal clownery. So as such, the downgrade won't mean much for markets in the near term, for the simple reason that everybody knew it was coming with our pathetic Republican Congress scheming another $2 trillion deficit and CBO projections of $52 trillion in debt by 2035 and $88 trillion by 2055 when our kids or grandkids will be paying taxes. So those are the numbers that matter here, because every trillion in additional debt costs about $34 billion in interest alone, every penny borrowed, of course. Now, $34 billion is roughly the entire budget of the Department of Justice, and that's one single trillion. Multiply by 36, and we're already paying over $1 trillion of interest, more than the Department of Defense. At $52 trillion, we're paying more interest than Social Security. At 88, we'll be paying almost $3 trillion in interest alone, half the budget in interest, all of which we borrow. So where does it end? 3 possibilities. Either the tax-paying livestock take it trillion by trillion, and our economy grinds to a halt like Europe or Canada. Second, voters rise up and toss the bums in upcoming primaries and we make the budget great again. Or third, bond markets revolt, the so-called bond vigilantes, demanding higher and higher rates, in fear the feds cannot pay their debts and will instead let inflation rip to melt away the debt along with Americans' life savings. In short, Moody's may be the most cynical canary in the coal mine, but the truth is downgrades are long overdue on our way off the fiscal cliff. A word from our lead sponsor, Unchained.com. It's time to think about your annual IRA contributions. An IRA is an investment vehicle that can save you a lot of taxes. With Unchained, you can hold real Bitcoin in your IRA, get access to trading, inheritance, and loans, and it's the only company where you hold the keys and can verify that your Bitcoin is not being relent like banks do. We've seen futures-based ETFs underperform holding your own Bitcoin, so why settle for less? Book a friendly consultation at unchained.com/Peter. If you own gold or silver, you know they're a great hedge against financial instability and let you grow your wealth outside the banking system and gain greater control over your finances. Monetary Metals offers you the ability to increase your precious metal ounces every single month. Instead of paying to own metal, with Monetary Metals, you get paid 4% on your gold paid in more ounces. Now's the time to secure your wealth and build your legacy in an asset that the government cannot inflate away. Join thousands of investors earning interest in physical gold and silver every month with Monetary Metals. Visit monetarymetals.com/Peter to learn more. Now back to our show. Student loan payments are resuming for millions of deadbeat college grads, driving student loan delinquencies up by 700%. It's about to get a whole lot more crowded on OnlyFans. After a 5-year pause using COVID as the excuse, payments are set to resume this month on $1.7 trillion of student loan debt forked over to left-wing universities. The Department of Education estimates just 40% of loans are current, meaning roughly 25 million deadbeat grads are out gobbling avocado toast instead of repaying taxpayers. In fact, a record 1 in 5 loans are, quote, seriously delinquent, meaning they're more than 90 days past due. That's normally when it goes to collections. So the dirty secret is college grads have been deadbeats for decades, sporting default rates twice those of credit cards. Now, this is striking considering college gives you roughly $900,000 of extra income over a lifetime. Grad school takes that to about $2 million. Yet, grads pay their bills worse than randos putting lottery tickets on the Visa at 7-Eleven, suggesting perhaps taxpayers should not be subsidizing college debt, just like we don't pay off people's credit cards. A big reason for it, of course, is that Democrats know that college is a $1 trillion indoctrination farm. I mentioned in previous videos how college swings you roughly 14 points Democrat for whites, It's actually closer to 24 points. To keep it going, on top of the $1.7 trillion, Dems have built a constellation of sweetheart repayment programs that slash the amount grads have to pay even when they pay. These include, most dramatically, Joe Biden's attempts to cancel student debt. Cancel meaning transfer it to blue collar, since obviously colleges would not be out of pocket. As in, somebody's paying the debt, it's just not the guy who got the $900,000 raise. Interestingly, Biden kept canceling debt even when the Supreme Court told him to stop, which seems relevant for Donald Trump's current disputes with the Supremes over illegal immigrant rapists. But for all the headlines on Biden, the real theft happens under the surface. That constellation of programs effectively forgiving loans for so-called public service, which of course includes NGOs that are overwhelmingly left-wing. These programs are used by 1 in 4 borrowers, about 12 million. A new GOP bill would trim the handouts, but it stands slim chances of passing given Democrat support for the college bailout swindle. So what's next? In the near term, repayment means millions of college grads will have to cut back on the avocado toast, given Trump's Department of Education is promising to garnish wages, garnish federal benefits, and confiscate tax refunds. The wider issue is this piles on top of record debt for American households, which the New York Fed just announced hit a record $18.2 trillion. So that's over $140,000 of debt per family, and it's almost double what it was in 2013, just 12 years ago. That debt is concentrated in younger families, so median debt for 35 to 44-year-olds is actually 3 to 4 times higher than it is for boomers above age 65. Young and middle-aged Americans are sleepwalking into debt slavery, and $120,000 for college is a big reason why. That was hidden during COVID. Now it is back with a vengeance. The solution's simple. End federal funding of college. Students in real majors can get private loans. Everybody else can start contributing to society instead of taking what's not theirs and failing to pay it back. It turns out Joe Biden's handlers made up 1 million fake jobs to try and steal the election. Happily, the American people did not believe them, nor did they believe the lying mainstream media. So admits the Department of Labor in a stunning jobs revision that knocked nearly 1 million jobs off the 6 months leading into last year's election, taking job growth from a supposed gain of nearly 800,000 jobs, the Joe Biden miracle, to a loss of 164,000 jobs. Now, you may recall the endless lectures from mainstream media about the Biden miracle. Vibesession was the journalist-approved gaslight for people living hand-to-mouth. Paul Krugman lectured us how inflation wasn't real. Those Walmart receipts were all in your head. And turns out the miracle was built on 1 million fake jobs in 6 months alone, along with impressively creative accounting on inflation. So I put out a report last year with my based colleague, E.J. Antoni, how Biden's handlers understated inflation by nearly 50%, suggesting we may have been in recession Biden's entire last year. Happily, Biden's lying handlers, soon to be Cackle's lying handlers, are safely in the past. Mentioned in recent videos how growth in real jobs is now on fire. Real jobs as in not government jobs, not even government-funded jobs, but honest jobs in the private sector, the real economy that pays for government jobs. Trump's latest job report showed a 177,000 gain in a single month, 90% of them private sector, with many more to come given the off-the-charts foreign investment Trump's pouring into America that could double or triple investment-driven job growth. Moreover, those jobs are going to native-born Americans. The Bureau of Labor Statistics separately released its employment situation count. Hidden in there was the juicy nugget that native-born workers increased by 1 million, while foreign-born workers dropped by 410,000, perhaps many of them self-deporting. So this is night and day from Biden, during which all the job growth was foreign-born, many of them illegals, undercutting native-born and legal immigrants alike. Now, I was looking forward to the Trump economy because he was promising all the right things: government cuts, deportation and deregulation, lower taxes, and more energy. But even I've been surprised how fast Trump has turned it around. I expected more Biden hangover, especially with Congress now respending the DOGE savings. Given these new revisions of 1 million fake jobs in 2 quarters alone, it is all the more impressive. It reinforces that once the revisions all come clean, we may have been in stagflation for years under Biden, paved over by our comically dishonest news media. So what's next? The three big chess pieces on jobs are deportations, tariffs, and that investment boom. If those numbers on native jobs sustain, self-deportations could get into the millions, driving up native-born employment and wages. Meanwhile, if tariffs keep drawing trillions of investment inside that big tariff umbrella they have so far, that could double it. The last man standing, as always, is Congress. We'll see how bad the damage is in their upcoming budget, but even Congress will have trouble kneecapping this job market. A word from our sponsor. One of the best ways to secure your Bitcoin is with a hardware wallet, a physical device that lets you keep your coins offline without internet connection. One of the most trusted names in hardware wallets is CoinKite, maker of the famous block clock. CoinKite devices are made in Canada. They're run by passionate Bitcoiners who've been at this since 2012, back when Bitcoiners were trading in person at swap meets. You can pick up hardware wallets and plenty of other goodies at coinkite.com/ProfSaintAnge. That's CoinKite.com/ProfSaintAnge. Okay, back to our show. Japan's bond markets are, quote, imploding as Japan's prime minister calls the situation, quote, worse than Greece. As in the Greece that defaulted on 3/4 of its national debt in 2012. Will Japan be replacing Argentina as the poster child of the IMF? For decades now, Japan has been teetering on the edge of a fiscal cliff, with government debt hitting 263% of GDP. In U.S. terms, that's a $65 trillion debt. Now, that's way past the traditional red line of 100% of GDP. In fact, it's almost double Greece's debt to GDP back in 2012. This has only been sustainable because the vast majority of Japanese government debt is held by the Japanese people, who have a very strong bias for domestic assets and park it in banks and life insurers. That's in contrast to Greece, where 8 in 10 owners were footloose foreigners who dump at the first sign of trouble. Now, it helps that the central bank, the Bank of Japan, has bought a majority of government debt. In the U.S., it's under 1/5. Still, the sheer scale of Japan's debt has been a sword of Damocles over markets. It's a big reason the Bank of Japan moves so slow and so late for fear of upsetting the delicate balance. Well, markets just crashed that delicate balance with the latest auction of Japanese debt hitting the weakest fundamentals since 1987, as in nobody wants Japanese bonds anymore. This sent bond prices tumbling to all-time records. The benchmark 10-year hit levels last seen in the 2008 crisis. J.P. Morgan called it a, quote, collapse. Now, this matters because in Japan, like the U.S., bonds hold up the entire financial system. Banks, of course, but also pensions for 40 million increasingly impoverished Japanese, including 96% of those over age 60. Now, what sent bonds tumbling was new data showing Japan edging into recession again, paired with inflation in Japan that's now 3.7%, double the rate in Donald Trump's America. In other words, Japan is falling into stagflation. The data knocked bond markets, but what really sent it over the edge was that worse than Greece comment by the prime minister, because it was delivered in the context of his refusing to stimulate the economy with tax cuts, as in he's admitting that Japan has hit the wall. It can never afford tax cuts again because the debt is simply too big. This actually happened in Britain a couple years ago when freshly printed Prime Minister Liz Truss actually did propose tax cuts to stimulate a slowing economy, only to have bond markets collapse in Britain, putting major British banks and major pension funds at risk of going bust, at which point she retreated. And so Japan now joins the British in the basket case of deplorables who have borrowed their way into fiscal paralysis. So it's next. Japan could buy a couple more years of stability if they can cut a trade deal with Trump. But it's only a matter of time. Japan has now crossed the Rubicon of tax cut straitjacket. The next stop is required tax hikes. That would send Japan into a doom loop with higher debt driving higher taxes that shrink the economy and grow the relative debt. While America's a decade behind Japan on debt, now that $2 trillion deficits are looking permanent, apparently no matter which party is in charge, we are headed straight down the same path as Japan. Thanks for tuning in. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and go to petersaitange.com for daily videos and in-depth articles with charts and all the gory details. Okay, we'll be watching. See you next time.